Hello and welcome. You're watching Race to Power. My name is Mohammed Saleh. And on the show today, the American President Donald Trump has halted funds worth $1 billion that are earmarked for sustaining America's affordable housing. And in Europe, authorities in Belgium and Portugal have raided about 21 locations to investigate into the alleged links with China's tech giant Huawei. But let's, of course, start with this big story from the United States of America, where amidst the visible overhaul in the global alliances in the Trump era, what is interesting is that the once critical North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and by extension, the NATO chief, now look really desperate for relevance. Now, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is all set to reach the US in just a few hours from now, and it is clear that the real challenge for him now is to keep President Donald Trump and the United States involved in NATO. In the White House under Donald Trump, it is Donald Trump that has turned into a fulcrum of sorts in the current geopolitical scenario. Now, Ukraine turns to Trump, so do France and the United Kingdom to make their deals on defense. It is Donald Trump who plays peacemaker, and it is his envoy who meets with the Ukrainian officials and then heads to Moscow for a possible deal. And NATO finds itself out of the picture completely. The NATO chief will be meeting with Donald Trump as he struggles to ensure that the alliance can function without Washington and show more than anything else that it can work with an openly antagonistic Trump administration that is more attuned to Moscow than with Brussels. All right, now to give us more perspective on this, we're joined on this broadcast by Voice of America's correspondent Jessica Stone, who's joining us live from the White House. Now, Jessica, NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte arrives at the White House in a few hours from now. So how does the Trump administration view this visit?
Well, yeah, he'll be meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office just to my left here around noon Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Followed by a working lunch. And yes, the main objective for him is really to restate the need for NATO and NATO's involvement in the Ukraine conflict in particular. As for the White House, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said to reporters yesterday that she believes President Trump will raise his objective, which is to have NATO members meet a 5% of GDP defense spending target. Remember that under his first administration, he urged NATO members to meet a 2% GDP obligation, which they had already made, but few were meeting. Now many more of them have been meeting, and certainly the European Union and the European Commission have encouraged NATO members from those countries to increase defense spending post-haste. But that was just in the last few weeks. We're seeing an urgency to that mission now as we go into these Ukraine talks that are happening in Moscow at this hour. We know that Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, is there meeting with Russian officials to lay out Washington's demands to meet those ceasefire obligations should Moscow agree.
Indeed. Now, Russia has responded to Washington's ceasefire proposal with Ukraine, saying that NATO membership for Ukraine is a clear red line and it does not want foreign troops on Ukrainian soil. Does that leave NATO with any role in this conflict?
I think it's a good question, and it will really remain to be seen what happens at the negotiating table. Essentially, an answer will happen, I think, at that negotiating table. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff meeting with those Russian officials who have already signaled they will not accept foreign troops on the ground in Ukraine or any NATO membership for Ukraine. So what is the role of NATO going forward? Is it to provide peacekeepers and the U.S. convinces the Russians to accept that? Is it to provide some other sort of support? That is going to be part of the conversation. Washington, meantime, has maintained that its security guarantee to the Ukrainians, which is something the Ukrainians have demanded, will be that critical minerals deal, which is yet to be signed, and the presence of U.S. workers on the ground. Having said that, though, Ukraine and NATO members, few of them really believe that that will stop President Putin from moving further into Ukraine and into Russia, or into Europe, if he so desires.
All right, interesting. We'll have to see as to how that plays out. Thank you very much indeed, Jessica Stone, for joining us with those details there.
You bet.
Now, Donald Trump's America is witnessing a range of different developments every day. From new decisions, big statements, a rising backlash against policy overhaul, and citizens' protests. So here's the lowdown of everything that has happened in just the last 24 hours. Let's begin. So the American president's funding bill is facing backlash in the Senate, and it comes at a time when the lawmakers are scrambling to avoid a government shutdown on Friday. The Democrat senators, led by Chuck Schumer, have said that they will reject the government funding bill, which was passed in the House of Representatives. The Blue Camp's lawmakers are demanding that the GOP lawmakers should propose an extension for a period of 4 weeks. The time will be used to detail out a long-term bipartisan plan and to carefully consider the provision of each separate spending bill. The stopgap bill, which the Republican lawmakers wrote and then passed in the lower house, concerns maintaining the flow of federal funds. While the U.S. Congress chambers are running against time on one issue, another emerges through Trump's latest decision. The American president has halted funds worth $1 billion that were earmarked for sustaining America's affordable housing. Now, Donald Trump's halt on these funds has put over 25,000 low-income housing units at risk. Now, the Green and Resilient Retrofit program passed by the Congress in 2022 provided essential funding for energy efficiency upgrades such as repairing roofs, replacing heating systems and also flood-proofing. This program was crucial for maintaining affordable housing for low-income Americans with grants and loans that leverage additional investments for major repair work. Now, the funding freeze leaves hundreds of housing projects in jeopardy across 42 states and also in Puerto Rico. Now, the program's shutdown threatens vital renovation projects without funding. Residents face uncertainty and projects will likely experience delays and increased costs. Now, housing experts have warned that without these essential upgrades, many buildings will in fact deteriorate, ultimately exacerbating the nationwide housing crisis. On the third front, the immigrant exodus under Trump's presidency has reached New York's hotel's doorstep. The Department of Justice is investigating a hotel in Manhattan for using the property as an immigrant shelter and providing housing. The prosecutors are in fact questioning the hotel management and they're asking for a full list of immigrants living on the property. Now, the Department of Justice alleges that the hotel in question has violated the immigration law. They're now investigating as to who financed and managed the immigrant shelter program. The streets of New York and other cities are also witnessing some regular protests in support of the Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil. Now, hundreds are protesting against the government and are demanding that the authorities should release the leader of the pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University. The immigration authorities, remember, had arrested Mahmoud Khalil despite the activist being a legal permanent resident with a green card. And after his arrest, the authorities are preparing to deport Khalil without formally accusing him of any crime. Now, critics are now demonstrating against the crackdown on pro-Palestinian voices within the United States. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what is unfolding in the United States of America, we are joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who is joining us live from New York. Susan, amongst the many things that are happening under the Trump administration, one thing that stands out is this cut of funding to affordable housing. The housing crisis in America is a huge issue, and the Biden and the Trump administration now cutting off $1 billion that was to go towards affordable housing. How will this resonate with the American public?
Yeah, the issue of affordable housing is really something that many Americans grapple with. The elusive American dream that ultimately by a certain age, under 30, you were able to own a house is really far gone at this point. And just in New York alone, we learned that rent prices are now at an all-time high. They went up, and in Manhattan alone, the lowest rent that you can find is around $5,000. So you can imagine how much the issue of rent, housing, and homelessness, where a lot of Americans are just one paycheck away from being homeless, it really grapples the mind of the American psyche. It's important to note that these fundings, these cuts to these fundings were for these green initiatives that really weren't able to be utilized the way they should for affordable housing. Ultimately, when housing was made in affordable regions or affordable housing was put up even in places like Manhattan and Los Angeles, those initiatives weren't utilized. So I think the cut right now, at least, is for this reason, to try to figure out where that money can be utilized, where it actually goes to the proper avenues, as opposed to just sort of being this poster for clean energy. And I think that's the main question. Now, again, as you mentioned, housing is so important. It's yet to be seen whether or not the American people have the patience to see these kinds of reforms, not just this one.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with all those details then. Now, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency has come under the judicial hammer. A federal court judge has ordered Elon Musk to release internal documents regarding the actions that are being taken by DOGE to slash government spending. The case was in fact taken up by the court, and it refused to provide any documents to citizens for responsibility and ethics in Washington. Now, DOGE has argued that it wasn't an agency subject to Freedom of Information Act. Now, the court has asked Trump's administration to file a status report on the production of documents by the 20th of March. The court has also pointed out that the functioning of DOGE is marked by unusual secrecy. Now, Musk leads US President Donald Trump's crackdown on government spending. Thousands of government workers have been fired, and funding for various projects has been stopped by DOGE. Now, numerous lawsuits have been filed against DOGE, prompting judicial probe into actions of the agency.
And the Constitution, we, the people, stop, approve, approve, stop.
Now, there are fresh developments that have unfolded in an ongoing corruption case in Europe that concerns the top lawmakers of the European Parliament itself. Now, earlier in the day, the authorities in Belgium and Portugal raided about 21 different locations to investigate into the alleged links with China's tech giant Huawei. The authorities have said that these locations are connected to the lobbyists who were involved with Huawei. The Chinese company is under the scanner for allegedly bribing members of the European Parliament. The police have arrested about 100 individuals for further questioning, and top leadership, however, has denied to comment on the matter.
If you could confirm whether there have been no contact at all between the suspects and the Commission.
So we have strictly no comment to make on this investigation.
So EU leaders are on the radar for favouring Huawei's commercial interests. Investigators say that these lawmakers received lavish holidays abroad, expensive football game tickets and also gifts in return. The alleged kickbacks were concealed as conference expenses and were paid through various intermediaries. Officials and are also looking at whether the activities involved money laundering. The case, of course, remember, came to light back in 2019. Crackdown on Huawei began 5 years ago when the American government added Huawei to a trade blacklist. Now, Washington barred the company from accessing US markets and using Google products, including Android devices. Now, Western intelligence has accused Huawei of carrying out espionage on behalf of the Chinese government, but the company continues to deny the claim. Now, European nations followed in the footsteps of the United States and began investigations of their own. The probe began shortly after Huawei upped its lobbying efforts on the continent to minimize the backlash from the American crackdown. Now, the company's PR blitz included quoting European Parliament members to support companies' commercial interests. All right, now to give us more perspective on this, we are joined in this broadcast by our correspondent Will Denslow, who is joining us live from Brussels. Will, this is a case that's been a political hot potato. There are raids that are being carried out. A number of these different European leaders are under the scanner. Give us a sense of, how crucial it is for these European leaders to, in fact, come clean on these efforts of lobbying by this Chinese tech giant, which has been blacklisted.
It's absolutely hugely significant and certainly sent a degree of shockwaves when this news began to trickle through after these raids in the early hours of Thursday morning here in Brussels, and as you mentioned, in Portugal as well. We've heard from the Belgian prosecutors who say that this is an ongoing investigation of active corruption, the alleged forging of documents and money laundering. They say that this is an investigation that started in 2021 and goes up to the present day, and under the guise of commercial lobbying. You mentioned some of the accusations that have been charged, these alleged lavish gifts, holidays that you said, football matches in return for, as the prosecutors said, private commercial interests in the context of political decisions. So these are certainly serious charges. According to reports, 15 or so former or current MEPs are tied up in this investigation. Now, while there was very little response from the European Commission, we have indeed heard from some officials at the European Parliament that this investigation centres around a Parliament spokesperson come out and saying that when requested, they always cooperate with the judicial the judicial proceedings. We've also heard from the Parliament's Vice President saying that these developments are deeply concerning. This, of course, comes as the Parliament is still dealing with the ramifications, the repercussions of the so-called Qatargate scandal that rocked Brussels in the past. That was a influence for corruption allegations, so certainly not the first time that such charges have been levelled here in Brussels, and certainly a firm response has been called on from many members of the European Parliament in response to this latest probe.
Indeed. Thank you very much, indeed, Will Dinslow, for joining us from Brussels and getting us all those updates there. Now, there appears to be no end to the political bickering over the Indian government's three-language formula that is being presented in its national education policy. After Tamil Nadu, the Telangana government has also escalated its attack on the BJP-led NDA government at the centre. It has said that it is a conspiracy and nothing less than a conspiracy by the centre against the southern states which is afoot. The DMK government, remember, is in the eye of the storm for replacing the rupee symbol in the state budget logo for the year 2025-26 with a Tamil symbol for the rupee. Now, the centre has termed the move to be anti-India. The state has defended the replacement, saying that it is part of its push against the imposition of Hindi by the centre.
See, using the mother tongue for all purposes is the theme of any union government principles, what they have said. So naturally, it is fallen in that lines.
Now, rallying behind his opposition ally from Tamil Nadu on the Hindi imposition row, the Telangana Chief Minister Revanth Reddy has said that it is nothing less than a conspiracy that is in the works against the southern states by the centre. Now, sharpening the attack, Revanth Reddy said that the delimitation exercise is an attempt to curb the power of the opposition-ruled states. He said that the Congress will be part of a meeting called by Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin to discuss Hindi imposition-related issues.
Regarding Government of India and Bharatiya Janata Party is conspiring against southern states in the name of delimitation. Delimitation is going to limitation for south. This is not delimitation. This is limitation for south. At any cost, we are not going to accept that limitation.
Now, all this comes a day after the M.K. Stalin lashed out of the centre over the NEP and then termed it as nothing but a saffron policy that the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister has also resolved to bring together parties from the opposition-ruled states, saying that he would resist attempts by centre that penalise population control. The DMK side and the Deputy Chief Minister Udayanidhi Stalin also ripped into the central government, accusing it of insulting the people of Tamil Nadu and Periyar, the revered figure in the southern state.
Are we uncivilized? You look like we are uncivilized. Do we look like that? மொழிபெயர்க்கிறீங்களா இல்லை நான் அப்படின்னு அவங்க சொல்றவங்க தான் கொஞ்சம் நாகரிகம் இல்லாமல் தமிழர்களை விமர்சிக்கிறாங்க. இதுக்கெல்லாம் சரியான பதிலை தமிழ்நாட்டு மக்கள் எப்போ வாய்ப்பு கிடைக்குதோ அப்போ கொடுப்பாங்க.
Well, the central government maintains that the NEP aims to promote multilingualism. Opposition, particularly the DMK, has termed it as an attempt to impose Hindi on the southern states and to destroy Tamil Nadu's education system. The state remains adamant that it will not implement the three-language formula that's been proposed as part of the National Education Policy of 2020. Now, there is a political battle that is gaining momentum in Zimbabwe. A man called Bombshell, that's his name, who was part of a ruling party itself, is challenging the incumbent president. Now, he goes by the name Bombshell Blessed Geza, is a war veteran, and he's speaking out against the president Emerson Mnangagwa and is pushing for the president to step down. The ZANU-PF party expelled Geza last week after, for his statements, the senior leadership of the ruling party accused him of indiscipline and fostering factionalism. The Bombshell Geza began his tirade against the president after the latter announced his intention to retain power for a third straight term. The Zimbabwe's constitution allows a leader to only serve 2 terms, and Mnangagwa's second term ends in 2028. The Bombshell has accused the president of corruption and of trying to hold on to power for all the wrong reasons. Now, Geza is the leader of a faction that consists of ex-combatants like him who say that the corruption in Zimbabwe frustrates them. And the group that once supported the president now blames him for it. And our correspondent Calden Ongmu has sent us this report from Johannesburg. Listen in.
South Africa's 2025 historic budget is a punch to the gut for most South Africans who are already struggling to make ends meet. Why I say historic? This was the first time tabling of the budget was delayed. What was meant to be tabled last month was postponed to Wednesday because partners in the Government of National Unity couldn't agree to Finance Minister's proposed VAT increase. Experts say the budget row sets a precedent for South Africa's political landscape, continued dreadlocks, protracted negotiations, and an overall difficulty in governing. Democratic Alliance, that's the ANC's biggest coalition partner, has remained adamant that it would not support any VAT increase, leaving the question of whether it will vote for the revised budget. Main opposition party Umkhonto we Sizwe has threatened countrywide protests if VAT is raised. South Africans have never experienced this type of situation in the past, but taxation changes cannot be implemented without the legislature's approval, and the ANC alone no longer has the numbers to provide it after losing its majority in its last elections. This is Calden Ongmu from Johannesburg, South Africa, for WION The World is One.
All right, let's also now take a quick look as to what is making headlines in the world of politics. The Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara has signed a temporary constitution that effectively extends his rule for at least 5 years. Now, al-Shara has recently made attempts to try and consolidate power across Syria after a recent insurgency in the Alawite-dominated areas. The Syria's interim government reached a landmark agreement to merge with the Kurdish-led militia in northwestern Syria with the Syrian armed forces. India's President Draupadi Murmu has approved registration of an FIR, or First Information Report, against the Aam Aadmi Party leaders Manish Sisodia and Satyendra Jain in a classroom scam. Now, the alleged 1,300 crore rupee scam is related to the construction of classrooms in Delhi government schools when the Aam Aadmi Party was in power in the national capital. Now, Germany's incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz is facing his first test in the parliament. Merz is pursuing the outgoing parliament to approve a €500 billion fund to ramp up infrastructure and military spending. Now, Merz is facing opposition mainly from the Greens, who claim that the planned infrastructure fund should be used for investments to speed Germany's clean energy transition. And with that, a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. Thanks for watching.
General Bryce Oligingema, the strongman of Gabon since the 2023 coup that overthrew the Bongo dynasty, submits his candidacy for the April 2025 presidential election. In a remote Maasai community in Kenya, young girls are learning more than just academics. They are training to stand up for themselves. And a Nigerian mother turns her crochet passion into thriving footwear business. Watch World of Africa at these times on WION. World is One.
As the world gears up to celebrate the Festival of Colors, we get you a list of films you can watch on Holi. Find out all about the record-breaking Chinese film Lisa 2. Get a glimpse of the recently concluded Mughal-e-Azam the musical. All this and much more with me, Diksha Bisla, on WION eClub at these times.
This week on Tech It Out, we take a look at London's phone theft epidemic. We also show you how drones are transforming emergency communication system. And we tell you about a new age technology that is driving the future of connected cars. This and more on WION World is One at these times.
What do you think about the tokenization of this program?
I think it's very innovative, tokenizing their own show.
We want as many people as possible to have a go, experience it, set up a wallet.
I think it's a fantastic opportunity to open up a wallet, understand what it is to have the fractionalization of something.
The stress of our world